To my father, I was just a grease monkey failure, a stain on his pristine real estate empire. He believed my hands only knew how to hold a wrench, never suspecting they signed billion-dollar military treaties. That retirement dinner was designed to crown my greedy brothers and finally exile me. But when the guest of honor arrived, he ignored my father, saluted me, and asked the question that silenced the room. You are the general. My name is James Johnson, and at 42 years of age, I have learned that the loudest rooms are often the loneliest places on earth. I stood in the corner of the Grand Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, a venue that smelled of old money, starched linens, and the kind of desperation that only the ultra-wealthy can emit. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck and perfumes that cost more than a Honda Civic, crystal chandeliers, massive and dripping with diamonds of glass, hung from the gold-leafed ceiling like Judgment Day pendulums. Below them, the cream of New York society swirled in a carefully choreographed dance of networking and backstabbing. To anyone glancing my way, I was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of high society. I was wearing a charcoal suit I had purchased off the rack at a department store 5 years ago. It was clean, pressed, and functional, but in a room where men wore bespoke Italian wool that cost $5,000 a yard. My attire screamed mediocrity. I held a glass of sparkling water, not because I could not drink, but because I needed my senses sharp. I always needed my senses sharp. It was a habit from a life I lived in the shadows, a life the people in this room could not even begin to fathom. The center of this solar system was my father, Richard Johnson. He stood near the main stage, basking in the adoration of his peers. He was the CEO of Vanguard Estates, a real estate titan who had reshaped the skyline of Manhattan with steel and ego. Tonight was his retirement party. It was supposed to be a celebration of a 40-year career, but I knew better. It was a coronation. It was the night he would formally hand over the keys to the kingdom to his chosen heirs, and finally, publicly, wash his hands of me. He looked impeccable. His tuxedo was midnight blue, tailored to hide the slight paunch of his 60s. His silver hair was coiffed to perfection. He laughed at a joke made by a banking executive, a deep, practiced baritone that I had grown up fearing. He looked like the perfect patriarch, the perfect businessman, the perfect father, whatever he was. He was not looking at me. In the 2 hours since I had arrived, his gaze had swept over my corner exactly 0 times. I was a ghost he hoped would fade away if he ignored me hard enough. Flanking him were the twins, Lucas and Julian, my older brothers by 4 years. They were carbon copies of Richard, just younger and hungrier. They moved through the crowd like sharks in a koi pond. They wore matching black Armani suits, their hair slicked back with the same expensive gel, their teeth bleached to a blinding white. They held court with potential investors, their hands animated as they discussed leverage and equity and returns on investment. I watched Lucas clap a man on the shoulder, a little too hard, asserting dominance disguised as camaraderie. I watched Julian whisper something into the ear of a beautiful woman, his eyes scanning the room over her shoulder to see who else was watching him. They were predators. They were successful. And they despised me. I took a sip of my water, the bubbles harsh against my throat. I had positioned myself near a potted palm, far enough from the main traffic flow to be invisible, but close enough to observe the tactical layout of the room. Old habits die hard. I noted the exits. I noted the security detail standing by the door's private contractors, sloppy, clearly bored. I noted the sight lines. Well, if it isn't the family disappointment. The voice was oily and familiar. I did not need to turn around to know it was Lucas, but I did anyway. He and Julian had broken away from their admirers, to come pay their respects to the runt of the litter. Lucas swirled his glass of scotch, a 30-year single malt, that probably cost $400 a pour. He looked me up and down, his lip curling in a sneer that he did not bother to hide. "Enjoying the free water, James?" Julian asked, stepping up beside his twin. "Try not to drink too much. We would hate for you to cost the company an extra $2. "Hello, Lucas. Hello, Julian," I said. My voice was calm. It was the same voice I used when briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Flat, and devoid of emotional leakage. "Look at him," Lucas said to Julian, gesturing at me with his glass as if I were an exhibit at a zoo. 42 years old, and he still dresses like he is going to a court hearing for unpaid parking tickets. "Did you fix any carburetors today, James? Or did you spend the day unclogging toilets?" "I am currently consulting," I said simply. It was not a lie. I consulted on global defense strategies involving nuclear deterrence and logistical supply chains for 3 continents. "Consulting," Julian laughed. A harsh, barking sound. "That is the word losers use when they are between jobs at the gas station. Listen, James. Dad let you come tonight out of pity. Do not embarrass us. Do not try to network. Do not try to pitch your little handyman services to our investors. These people build skyscrapers. They do not need someone to fix their lawnmowers." "I am just here to wish Father a happy retirement," I said. Lucas stepped closer, invading my personal space. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, mixed with mint and arrogance. "He does not need your wishes. He needs you to stay in your corner until the speeches are done, and then he needs you to leave. We are closing the biggest deal of the century tonight. We do not need the stench of failure wafting over the contract." They laughed again, clinking their glasses together before turning their backs on me. They walked away, high-fiving a passing stockbroker. I watched them go. I felt no anger. Anger is a waste of energy. Anger clouds judgment. I felt only a profound, cold pity. They thought they were kings, but they were merely children playing with blocks in a sandbox I had long since outgrown. I adjusted my cuff. Underneath the cheap fabric of my suit jacket, on my left wrist, was a watch. It was not a Rolex. It was a standard-issue tactical field watch with a scratched face. It was ticking down the seconds. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight swept across the room and landed on the stage. The chatter died down, replaced by polite applause as my father stepped up to the microphone. He gripped the podium with both hands, looking out over the sea of faces. He looked powerful. "Thank you," Richard boomed, his voice amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for coming. 40 years. It has been 40 years since I laid the first brick of what would become Vanguard Estates." He began his speech. It was a masterpiece of revisionist history. He spoke of his humble beginnings, which I knew for a fact involved a $2 million loan from his own father. He spoke of his vision, his sleepless nights, his sacrifices. "I built this for my family," Richard said, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. "For the future." He gestured to the side of the stage, where Lucas and Julian were now standing, looking solemn and important. "My sons," Richard announced. "Lucas, Julian, come up here." The crowd cheered as the twins jogged up the steps. Richard put his arms around them, beaming like a man who had won the lottery. "These 2 young men are the future of Vanguard," Richard declared. "They have the fire. They have the intellect. They have the Johnson blood running through their veins. When I look at them, I see the next 50 years of prosperity." He paused for effect. "I can retire in peace, knowing that my legacy is in the hands of giants." I stood in the shadows, watching the tableau. A father and his 2 sons, the holy trinity of Vanguard Estates. There was no mention of a 3rd son, no mention of the boy who had built bridges with popsicle sticks while the others played with calculators. No mention of the man standing 40 feet away. I had been erased from the narrative in real time. A waiter, a young man who looked terrified, was navigating through the crowd with a tray of red wine. He was trying to squeeze past a group of women with large handbags. He stumbled. It happened in slow motion. The tray tipped. Gravity took over. I saw it coming, but I did not move. To dodge it would have drawn attention. To catch it would have revealed reflexes that a mechanic should not possess. So I let it happen. 3 glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon crashed into my chest. The dark, red liquid splashed across my white shirt, soaking into the lapels of my gray suit. The glasses shattered on the floor with a sound that seemed to cut through the silence of the room. The waiter gasped, his face draining of color. "Oh my God, sir, I am so sorry. I am so sorry." The commotion drew eyes. People turned. Whispers started. "Who is that? Is he drunk?" "Look at the mess," before the boy could apologize again. A man in a tuxedo rushed over. It was Mr. Henderson, the hotel manager. I knew him. He had been managing events for my father for 20 years. He knew exactly who I was. Henderson grabbed the waiter by the arm, shoving him aside roughly. Then he turned to me. I expected an offer of a towel. I expected an apology. Instead, Henderson sneered. "Look at what you have done," Henderson hissed, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "You are cluttering the walkway, Mr. Johnson. You are always in the way." "He tripped," I said calmly, brushing a shard of glass from my sleeve. "He tripped because you are standing where you do not belong," Henderson snapped. He snapped his fingers at a busboy. "Clean this up, and get some soda water for the carpet. Do not worry about the gentleman's suit. I doubt it is worth the cost of the dry cleaning." A few people nearby chuckled. It was a cruel, low sound. "You should probably go to the restroom and dry off," Henderson said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "Or better yet, use the service exit. You look like a butcher who just finished a shift." I stood there, the wine cold and wet against my skin, seeping through to my undershirt. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, the pity, the disgust, the amusement. I looked up at the stage. My father had stopped speaking. He was looking down at me. He did not look concerned. He looked annoyed. He looked at me the way one looks at a dog that has just relieved itself on a Persian rug. Lucas and Julian were smirking, whispering to each other. I took a breath. In my mind, I was back in the Kandahar province, with dust in my teeth and the weight of a flak jacket on my shoulders. I remembered the heat. I remembered the noise. I remembered the discipline. "Hold the line," I told myself. "Hold the line." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. I dabbed at the stain, my movements slow and deliberate. I did not apologize. I did not yell. I did not run. My left thumb brushed against the gold band on my ring finger, my wedding ring. Sarah. She was the only reason I had not turned around and walked out. She had told me to face them. She had told me that running away was what the old James would do. The new James, the man she loved, stood his ground. "I am fine," I said to Henderson. "Please, continue," Henderson huffed, clearly disappointed that I had not made a scene he could throw me out for. He turned his back on me. My father cleared his throat, bringing the attention back to the stage. "Apologies for the interruption," Richard said smoothly. "As I was saying, tonight is a night of celebration. But it is also a night of business. Vanguard Estates has always looked to the future. And the future is partnership." He paused, a gleam of triumph in his eyes. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the real reason for the party. "We have faced some challenges in the past year," Richard admitted, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "The market has been volatile, but the Johnson family does not retreat. We attack. And I am proud to announce that we are on the verge of securing a partnership that will secure our dominance for the next century." The crowd leaned in. The air in the room grew heavy with anticipation. "We are honored," Richard bellowed, his voice rising to a crescendo, "to be joined tonight by a man who holds the keys to the greatest infrastructure projects in the United States. A man who guides the very shield that protects our nation. He is a busy man, a powerful man, and he has flown in from Washington, D.C. just to be here with us tonight." My father gestured grandly toward the double doors at the back of the ballroom. The spotlight swung around, cutting through the darkness, searching for the prize. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced, "please welcome the chairman of the Senate Defense Committee, Senator Arthur Sterling." The doors remained closed for a heartbeat. The silence was absolute. I stood in my wine-stained suit, my hand still resting on my wedding ring. I knew Arthur. We played chess on Tuesdays when our schedules permitted. He preferred the Sicilian defense. I preferred the Queen's Gambit. The doors swung open. But it was not just Arthur Sterling who walked in. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from a cocktail party to something far more serious. The energy changed. It was no longer about money. It was about power. True power. And as the light hit the doorway, I took a sip of my water. The game was about to begin. To understand the silence of that ballroom, you have to go back 25 years to the silence of a garage in Westchester, while my brothers, Lucas and Julian, were inside the air-conditioned library, learning how to leverage assets and manipulate stock portfolios. I was usually found underneath the family lawnmower. I was 10 years old. The smell of gasoline and old oil was more comforting to me than the scent of the potpourri that filled the main house. I loved the logic of machines. If a gear was broken, you replaced it. If a belt was loose, you tightened it. There was a purity to mechanics that human relationships lacked. A machine did not lie to you. It did not judge you. It simply worked. Or it did not. My father, Richard, viewed this fascination not as a hobby, but as a defect. I remember one Saturday afternoon vividly. I had successfully rebuilt the carburetor on the gardener's truck. I was covered in grime, sweat streaking through the soot on my face, but I was beaming with pride. I wiped my hands on a rag and turned to see my father standing in the doorway of the garage. He was wearing a pristine white polo shirt and golfing slacks. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and revulsion. He did not ask me what I had fixed. He did not ask me how I had learned to do it. He simply pointed at my hands. "You look like a servant, James," he said. His voice was not angry. It was disappointed, which was far worse. "The Johnsons hire people to get dirty. We do not get dirty ourselves. Wash up. You have a lesson on compound interest in 20 minutes. That was the narrative of my youth. My passion was his shame. The divide became a canyon when I turned 16. I had entered the state young engineer competition, while other kids were building baking soda volcanoes. I had designed a small-scale, functioning hydraulic bridge model capable of sustaining 50 times its own weight. I had spent 4 months in the basement welding the miniature steel beams, calculating the load distribution, and refining the hydraulics. It was the first time I felt truly seen for who I was. The judges, actual civil engineers from top firms, were astounded. They shook my hand. They told me I had a gift. I won first prize. I came home that evening holding the trophy. It was a heavy, gold-plated pillar topped with a gear. I walked into the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs, hoping that this tangible proof of my excellence would finally earn a nod of respect from the man who sat at the head of the table. Richard was eating a steak. Lucas and Julian were there, snickering at something on the television. I placed the trophy on the table. "I won," I said. "First place in the state." My father stopped chewing. He looked at the trophy. Then he looked at me. He picked up his napkin and dabbed the corner of his mouth. "And what is the prize?" he asked. "A scholarship to a summer engineering camp," I replied eagerly. "And recognition." Richard let out a short, dry laugh. He picked up the trophy, weighing it in his hand for a second. I thought he was admiring the craftsmanship. Then, without a word, he stood up, walked over to the industrial-sized trash compactor in the corner of the kitchen, and dropped the trophy inside. The sound of the metal clanging against the bottom of the bin echoed like a gunshot. "Engineers are employees, James," he said, walking back to his steak. "Engineers are the people who wait in the lobby while the owners sign the deals. Johnsons are owners. We do not celebrate being good at being a servant. Do not bring trash like that into my kitchen again." I stood there, paralyzed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, but I did nothing. I just swallowed the lump in my throat, turned around, and walked out. That night, I retrieved the trophy from the trash. I hid it under my bed, wrapped in a sweater. It became my secret rebellion. The only light in that cold, marble mausoleum of a house was my mother, Evelyn. She was the polar opposite of Richard. She was soft where he was hard, kind where he was cruel. She saw the grease on my hands, not as dirt, but as art. She would sneak into the garage with sandwiches and listen to me explain how a differential gear worked. Even though I knew she did not understand a word of it. She just loved that I loved it. She would stroke my hair and tell me that my hands were magic. "Your father builds empires," she would whisper to me. "But you, James, you build the things that hold the world together." But life, much like a poorly maintained engine, has a way of breaking down when you least expect it. When I was 17, my mother died. It was a congenital heart defect, something silent and swift. One morning she was pouring coffee, and by the afternoon, the house was silent. Her funeral was a grand affair. As all Johnson events were, it was less about mourning and more about networking. Hundreds of people came, wearing black and speaking in hushed tones about market volatility. I stood by her grave, feeling as though the earth had opened up and swallowed the only person who knew my name. Richard did not cry. He shook hands. He checked his watch. He made sure the caterers were refilling the champagne. To him, grief was just another inefficiency to be managed. Without her, the house became a prison. Richard's expectations hardened into steel bars. He decided that I would attend Harvard Business School. It was not a suggestion. It was a decree. He had already pulled strings, made donations, and called in favors to ensure my acceptance. I was to graduate, join Vanguard Estates, and take my place as the third head of the Hydra, managing the maintenance contracts, while Lucas and Julian handled the investments. I looked at my future, and I saw a suffocating gray tunnel. I saw myself in a suit I hated, sitting in meetings I despised, becoming a hollow shell like my father. I could not do it. I began to lead a double life. During the day, I pretended to study for the SATs and read the business journals Richard left on my pillow. But at night, I was filling out a different application. I spent hours at the public library, researching the United States Military Academy at West Point. I was drawn to the Corps of Engineers. I read about their history. They built the Panama Canal. They built the dams that powered the country. They built bridges under fire. It was a place where rank was earned by sweat and competence, not by bloodline. It was a place where duty, honor, country meant more than profit, leverage, equity. I forged my father's signature on the consent forms. I trained in secret, running miles in the pre-dawn darkness before the rest of the house awoke. I studied calculus and physics until my eyes burned. The day the letter arrived. The air in the house was heavy with an impending storm. I was 18. It was a Tuesday. The mail was usually sorted by the housekeeper. But I had been intercepting it for weeks. When I saw the thick envelope with the Department of the Army return address, I knew my life was about to change. I did not hide it. I took it into my father's study. Richard was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, reviewing blueprints for a new shopping mall in Jersey. Lucas and Julian were lounging on the leather sofas, drinking espresso. "Father," I said. He did not look up. "Make it quick, James. I am busy." "I am not going to Harvard," I said. That got his attention. He looked up, his glasses sliding down his nose. The twins stopped talking. "Excuse me," Richard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I have been accepted to the United States Military Academy," I said, placing the letter on top of his blueprints. "I am going to West Point. I am going to study civil engineering and strategy." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb counting down. Richard picked up the letter. He read it. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He slowly crumpled the letter in his fist. "You applied behind my back," he stated. "I applied for my future." I corrected him. Richard stood up. He walked around the desk. I braced myself, half expecting him to hit me, but he did not. He stopped a foot away from me, his eyes cold and dead. "You think you are special," Richard spat. "You think playing soldier is honorable? It is for people who have no other options. It is for the poor. It is for the desperate. Johnsons do not take orders. James, we give them." "I want to serve something bigger than a bank account," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts. "Serve," Richard laughed, and it was a cruel, jagged sound. "You want to be a grunt, fine. But know this, if you walk out that door to be a soldier, you are no longer my son. You are dead to me." He pointed to the door. "I will cut you off. No trust fund, no inheritance, no safety net. You leave with nothing. Let us see how long your honor lasts when you are sleeping in the mud and eating garbage." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It is a promise," he replied. "Now get out of my sight before I have security throw you out." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had thrown my trophy in the trash. I looked at the twins, who were watching with wide, gleeful eyes, enjoying the show, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. "Goodbye, Richard," I said. I did not call him father. I went to my room. I did not pack much. I took a few changes of clothes, a book on structural mechanics, and the framed photograph of my mother from my nightstand. I reached into my sock drawer and pulled out my emergency stash, $200 I had saved from fixing neighbors' cars. That was it. That was my net worth. I walked down the grand staircase of the mansion for the last time. The crystal chandelier overhead seemed to mock me with its opulence. The marble floors echoed with the sound of my boots, cheap work boots, not the Italian leather my brothers wore. As I stepped out the front door, the cold autumn air hit my face. It felt clean. It felt real. I walked down the long, winding driveway. When I reached the iron gates, I turned back. Lucas and Julian were standing on the balcony of the second floor. They were holding their espressos, looking down at me like gargoyles. "Hey, soldier boy," Lucas shouted, his voice carrying across the lawn. "Don't step on a landmine or do. It would save us the embarrassment." "Enjoy sleeping in the mud, idiot," Julian added. "Write to us when you need money for socks." They laughed, their voices mingling with the wind. I watched them for a moment. They looked so small from where I stood. They were trapped in that house, trapped in their father's shadow, trapped in a life of golden handcuffs. I turned my back on them. I adjusted the strap of my backpack. I touched the pocket where my mother's photo rested against my chest. I began to walk toward the train station. It was a 5-mile walk. I had $200, a backpack, and a name that meant nothing to the world I was entering. I was terrified, but as I walked, the fear began to fade, replaced by a strange, rhythmic resolve. left foot, right foot. I was no longer James the Disappointment. I was no longer the mechanic with the dirty hands. I was a recruit. I was a builder. And I was going to build a life that they could never tear down. Because I was going to build it on a foundation of stone, not money. I did not know then that it would be 25 years before I saw them again. I did not know about the wars, the scars, or the stars that would one day weigh down my shoulders. I only knew that I was walking away from a funeral and toward a fight. And I was ready. West Point was not a university. It was a blast furnace designed to burn away the impurities of civilian life and leave behind only steel. For me, the fire was hotter than for anyone else. The moment I stepped onto the plane, my last name preceded me. To the upperclassmen, I was not Cadet Johnson. I was the billionaire's son. I was the soft, pampered heir who was playing soldier until things got too hard. They called me Silver Spoon during Beast Barracks. They made me scrub the latrines with a toothbrush until my knuckles bled, convinced that I would break and run back to the penthouse. They were wrong. I did not break. I calcified. Every insult was fuel. Every hour of hazing was a reminder of why I was there. I was not there to inherit an empire. I was there to build myself into a weapon. I woke up an hour before Reveille to run rucksack marches in the snow. I stayed up 2 hours after taps to study fluid dynamics and structural engineering. I became obsessed with the concept of load bearing. I learned that every structure, whether it is a bridge or a human being, has a breaking point. The key to survival is reinforcing the weak points before the pressure is applied. 4 years later, I stood on the parade field, the sun glinting off the polished brass of my uniform. I was the valedictorian of the class of 2006. I had the highest cumulative score in engineering and tactics. When the superintendent called my name to receive my diploma, the applause was polite. I looked out into the stands, scanning the VIP section where the families of the top cadets sat. I saw proud mothers weeping. I saw fathers beaming with pride. But in the seat reserved for the Johnson family, there was only empty air. No one came. Not Richard. Not the twins. Later that afternoon, a courier delivered a simple cream-colored envelope to my barracks room. Inside was a note typed on Vanguard Estate stationery. It read, "It is not too late to apologize. The position of junior sales associate is still open if you are ready to stop this nonsense." I burned the note in an ashtray. I watched the heavy paper curl into black ash, and with it, the last lingering hope of reconciliation. I packed my bag. I had my commission. I was a second lieutenant in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. My war was not fought in boardrooms. It was fought in the dust and heat of the Middle East. I deployed to a region where the sand was as fine as talcum powder, and the heat could melt the rubber soles of your boots, while the infantry kicked down doors. My unit built the roads that got them there. We built forward operating bases from nothing. We purified water. We erected barriers. But mostly, we built bridges. The Euphrates River does not care about politics. It is wide, deep, and fast. In the winter of 2009, my platoon was tasked with constructing a float bridge to replace a civilian structure that had been blown by insurgents. This bridge was the only way out for a battalion of Marines and 2,000 civilians trapped in a crossfire zone. We started at 0400 hours. The darkness was our cover, but it did not last. By dawn, we were halfway across the river. That was when the mortars started falling. The sound of an incoming mortar is distinct. It is a terrifying whistle that ends in a concussive thud. The water erupted around us in geysers of mud and steel. "Keep moving!" I screamed over the roar of the river and the explosions. "Lock the pins. Get those bays connected." I was a captain then. I was on the bridge, not on the shore. I was hauling steel panels alongside my men. My lungs burning with exertion. We were exposed. We were targets. But we could not stop. Stopping meant the Marines on the other side would be overrun. A round landed 20 meters upstream. The shockwave nearly knocked me into the water. Then, a direct hit struck the support pontoon of Bay 4. The metal twisted and groaned. The section buckled. A young corporal named Miller, a kid from Ohio, who had just shown me a picture of his newborn daughter, slid down the tilting deck. His leg got pinned under a shifted steel girder. The bridge was sinking. "Help, Captain, I'm stuck!" Miller screamed, his eyes wide with absolute terror. The water was rising around him. The enemy was adjusting their aim. The smart tactical decision would have been to cut the section loose and save the rest of the bridge. That is what a cold calculator would do. I was not my father. I ran toward the sinking section. The water was up to my waist. I grabbed the girder. It weighed 400 pounds. I dug my boots into the non-slip coating of the deck. I could hear the whistle of another round coming in. "Heave!" I roared, straining every muscle fiber in my back and legs. The metal groaned. It lifted an inch, just enough. "Move! Miller! Move!" Miller scrambled free, dragging his crushed leg. I let the girder drop. At that exact second, the world turned white. A mortar round impacted the water 10 feet away. The shrapnel flew like a swarm of angry hornets. I felt a sledgehammer blow to my left shoulder. It spun me around and threw me onto the deck. I looked down. My uniform was torn. Blood was pulsing out, dark and fast. I could not feel my arm. "Captain is down!" someone screamed. Someone. "Finish the bridge!" I yelled, my voice ragged. I tried to stand up, but the world tilted. "Do not stop! Finish the bridge!" They finished it. The Marines crossed. The civilians crossed. I was medevaced out on the last helicopter. Watching the bridge, my bridge standing firm against the current. The doctors saved my arm. But they could not erase the damage. A jagged scar, 6 inches long and ugly, ran from my collarbone to my shoulder blade. It was a map of pain. It was a receipt for a life saved. It was the only medal I cared about. That injury took me off the front lines, but it opened a door I never expected. During my recovery at Walter Reed, I started reading logistics reports. I realized that while bravery wins battles, logistics wins wars. You cannot fight if you do not have bullets. You cannot drive if you do not have fuel. I transferred to the strategy and logistics branch. I brought the same obsessive attention to detail that I had applied to rebuilding carburetors. I saw the global supply chain as a massive engine. I rose through the ranks with a speed that startled the establishment. Major, Lieutenant Colonel. Colonel. I worked in the Pentagon, in rooms without windows where the air was recycled and the decisions determined the fate of nations. I planned the withdrawal of equipment worth billions of dollars. I negotiated basing rights with foreign governments. I sat across the table from warlords and diplomats, using the silence I had learned as a child to unnerve them. I discovered I had a talent for negotiation. My father used negotiation to crush opponents. I used it to find the leverage point where everyone could walk away with something, so that we did not have to shoot our way out. I saved the government $3 billion in a single fiscal year by restructuring a defense contract with a major aerospace firm. I did it by finding a clause in the fine print that everyone else had missed. At the age of 39, I was nominated for the rank of Brigadier General 2 years later. I pinned on my second star, Major General James Johnson, the commander of the Army Corps of Engineers and a senior advisor to the Joint Chiefs on strategic infrastructure. I was responsible for 50,000 soldiers and civilians. I managed a budget that dwarfed the GDP of small countries. I had the direct phone number of the Secretary of Defense on my speed dial. But to my family, I was still just a handyman. I kept the worlds completely separate. It was a conscious choice. I did not want their validation. I did not want them to use my rank for their benefit. I remember a phone call with Richard just last Thanksgiving. I was in my office at the Pentagon, wearing my dress blues, looking at a satellite map of the South China Sea. "Hello, James," Richard said. His voice had grown raspy with age, but the condescension was timeless. "Are you coming home for the holidays, or are you too busy digging ditches?" "I cannot make it, Richard," I said, signing a deployment order for a battalion of engineers to flood relief zones in Florida. "Work is busy." "Still doing that government contract work?" he asked. "What is it now, pouring concrete for a new post office, you know? Julian just closed a deal for a luxury resort in the Hamptons. He is making real money. It is embarrassing that a Johnson is working for a civil servant's wage." "It pays the bills," I said, looking at the 2 stars on my shoulder. "Well, if you ever get tired of playing in the dirt, let me know. I might need someone to oversee the maintenance crew at the new resort. It would be a step up for you." "I will keep that in mind," I said. "Good. Don't work too hard, James. It is not like your work changes anything important." He hung up. I put the phone down. Outside my office, an aide knocked on the door. "General," the aide said. "Aide. The White House is on secure line 1. The President wants your assessment on the dam integrity in the conflict zone." "I am taking it," I said. I picked up the secure receiver. This was my life, a man of 2 shadows in one. I was a titan, a protector, a builder of nations in the other. I was a failure, a disappointment, a ghost. And as I stood in that ballroom at the plaza, listening to the silence that followed Senator Sterling's entrance, I knew that the 2 shadows were about to collide. The collision would be violent. It would be irreversible. The scar on my shoulder throbbed, a phantom reminder of the heat and the blood. It reminded me that I had survived mortar fire and collapsing steel. I could certainly survive a dinner party. I watched Arthur Sterling walk toward the stage. I saw the confusion on my father's face. I saw the arrogance on my brothers' faces beginning to crack, like bad plaster. They had no idea that the grease monkey they had mocked for 25 years was the man who signed the checks they were desperate to catch. The fire had tested me, and I had come out gold. Now, it was their turn to burn. I met Sarah in a place where net worth was measured in liters of clean water and beats per minute of a pulse. Not in stock options or square footage. It was 2012. I was a lieutenant colonel then, deployed to a refugee camp on the border of a conflict zone that the news had long since stopped covering. My unit was tasked with stabilizing the ground for a field hospital. The mud was knee-deep, a viscous, freezing slurry that sucked the boots right off your feet. We were trying to lay down perforated steel planking so the ambulances wouldn't sink to their axles. She was a surgeon with Doctors Without Borders when I first saw her. She was not wearing a gown or pearls. She was wearing scrubs that had been stained by 3 days of non-stop triage. And she was screaming at a supply truck driver in fluent Arabic. She was fierce. She was exhausted. And she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in a landscape of gray misery. I walked over to intervene, thinking the driver was giving her trouble. It turned out she was demanding he prioritize the delivery of antibiotics over the shipment of tent poles. "We can sleep in the rain," she was telling him, her eyes blazing. "But I cannot operate without cefazolin." I ordered my men to unload the medical crates first. She turned to look at me. She didn't salute. She didn't swoon. She just nodded, a sharp, efficient motion. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. "Now, if you could get your noisy generators to run a little quieter, my patients might actually sleep." "I will see what I can do, Doctor," I replied. "Dr. Sarah Miller," she said. "James," I said. Just James. We fell in love in the brief moments between shifts. over cups of terrible instant coffee and MREs that tasted like cardboard. We bonded over the shared understanding that the world was a broken place, but it was our job to try and fix it. One stitch, and one steel beam at a time. She did not care about my last name. When I told her about the Johnsons, about the skyscrapers and the rejection, she didn't pity me. She just took my hand, her fingers rough from scrubbing, and said, "Their loss is the Army's gain, and mine." We got married 6 months later in a courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. There were no guests, no press, and definitely no crystal chandeliers. The witness was the court clerk, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, who gave us a half-eaten box of donuts as a wedding gift. It was perfect. Sarah became my anchor. In the high-stakes, high-pressure world of the Pentagon, where I was navigating shark tanks more dangerous than any my brothers swam in. She was the one place I could be vulnerable. She knew everything. She knew the clearance levels I held. She knew the weight of the stars on my shoulders. When I came home at 2 a.m, smelling of stale air and stress, she would be there, reading a medical journal on the couch, waiting to remind me that I was a human being before I was a general. We built a life in Washington, D.C. that was aggressively normal. We bought a colonial row house in a quiet neighborhood. We drove a Volvo. We mowed our own lawn. To our neighbors. We were just James and Sarah, a government employee and a pediatrician. We liked it that way. However, the Johnson family could not leave well enough alone. I maintained a digital distance from them, but I never changed my email address. I suppose a part of me, the small wounded boy inside the general, still wanted to keep a line open. It was a mistake every few months. An email would ping into my personal inbox. They were never asking how I was. They were newsletters of narcissism. "James, look at this article in Forbes featuring Vanguard. We are crushing the Asian market, James. Julian just bought a yacht. It sleeps 12. Maybe if you save up for 10 years, you can afford a dinghy." They assumed I was a mid-level bureaucrat, a paper pusher buried in the basement of some government agency. They thought I stamped forms for a living. I never corrected them. The dynamic shifted from passive bragging to active annoyance on a Tuesday afternoon in 2023. I was in a sensitive compartmented information facility, or SCIF, reviewing satellite imagery of a hostile nation's missile silos. My personal phone, which I had to leave in a locker outside the secure zone, had 10 missed calls when I retrieved it. All from Lucas. I called him back during my drive home. "It is about time you picked up," Lucas said, skipping the hello. "I have been calling you for 3 hours. Do you not have a secretary?" "I was in a meeting, Lucas," I said, putting the car in gear. "What do you want?" "I need a favor," he said. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. "We are building a boutique hotel in Georgetown. Historical district. A nightmare. The local preservation board is blocking our permit because of some nonsense about the facade being culturally significant. It is a rotting brick wall. James, we need it gone." "And?" I asked. "And you work for the government in D.C., Lucas said, as if explaining basic math to a toddler. "You must know people. Zoning commissioners, city planners. Make a call. Tell them it is a federal necessity or something. Use whatever petty badge you have to scare them into signing the paper." I gripped the steering wheel. The arrogance was breathtaking. He wanted me to use my position, a position he knew nothing about, to bully a local historical society, so he could build a hotel. "I cannot do that, Lucas," I said calmly. "That is illegal and unethical. I have no jurisdiction over local zoning." "Jurisdiction," Lucas scoffed. "It is a phone call. James, don't give me that bureaucratic red tape garbage. We are family. This project is worth $40 million if we get delayed. We lose money. I am not making the call, I said firmly. There was a pause. Then, the venom came. You are useless, Lucas spat. You know that you have been sucking off the taxpayer teat for 20 years, and you cannot even pull a string for your own brother. Dad was right. You are just a waste of space. A little cog in a machine that doesn't care about you. Enjoy your pension, you loser. He hung up. I drove the rest of the way home in silence. When I walked through the door, Sarah saw my face. She didn't ask. She just poured me a glass of bourbon and sat with me on the porch while I watched the sun go down. He called, she asked. He called, I confirmed. He wanted something. He wanted me to break the law for a hotel. Sarah took a sip of her tea. Well, it is a good thing you are busy saving the world. Or you might have been tempted. She was right. I was busy. 6 months later, the Department of Defense initiated Project Titan Shield. It was the single largest infrastructure defense project in the history of the United States. The mandate was terrifyingly simple: ensure the survival of the American command structure in the event of a total global catastrophe, be it nuclear, biological, or cybernetic. We were not just upgrading bunkers. We were building entirely new subterranean cities, deep earth data centers, self-sustaining command nodes buried under granite mountains, hardened supply lines that could withstand a direct megaton strike. The budget was $500 billion. I was appointed the program executive officer. Every blueprint, every contract, every bag of cement had to be approved by my office. I had a team of 300 auditors and engineers, but the final signature was mine. My name, Major General James Johnson, was the ultimate gatekeeper of $500 billion. The project was top secret, classified at the highest level. The existence of the project was known to the public only as an infrastructure modernization initiative. But the contractors knew. The big defense firms, Lockheed, Raytheon, Bechtel, they knew. They circled the project like sharks sensing blood in the water. And then there was Vanguard Estates. It was ironic. The real estate market had crashed hard the previous year. Commercial real estate was bleeding out. High interest rates were killing development. Vanguard Estates was overleveraged. They had billions in debt and empty skyscrapers in Manhattan that no one wanted to rent. They were desperate for cash flow. They needed a government lifeline. I was sitting at my desk, surrounded by stacks of digital bids for subcontract package 7 Alpha. This package was for the construction of the non-critical support facilities warehousing, perimeter fencing, and surface-level logistics hubs for one of the sites in Nevada. It was a small slice of the pie, worth maybe $200 million. But for a drowning company, it was a life raft. I saw the name on the file, Vanguard Estates Construction. I froze. I opened the file. It was sloppy. They were proposing to use Grade B industrial concrete instead of the military-grade reinforced composite we had specified. They had underestimated the labor costs by 30%, which meant they planned to cut corners on safety. They had ignored the environmental stress requirements entirely. It was a bid designed to win on price, but fail on execution. It was exactly how my father did business: flashy on the outside, hollow on the inside. My instinct was to recuse myself. I called the legal counsel for the project, a sharp woman named Eleanor. I have a conflict of interest on the Vanguard bid, I told her. The CEO is my father. Eleanor paused. Do you have a financial interest in the company? None. I was disowned 25 years ago. Does your father know you are the program executive? No. He thinks I am a low-level clerk. Eleanor laughed. Then legally. General, you are clear to review it as long as you remain objective. In fact, given your knowledge of their operations, you are probably the best person to judge their capability. So I judged them. I did not reject them because Lucas had called me useless. I did not reject them because Richard had thrown my trophy in the trash. I rejected them because their plan would have killed people. I wrote the rejection memo myself. Recommendation: reject. Reason: the proposal fails to meet minimum structural integrity standards detailed in Section 4. The contractor demonstrates a lack of understanding regarding hardened facility requirements. The use of inferior materials constitutes a critical safety risk. Technical competency score: unsatisfactory. I signed it, J. Johnson, Review Board Chairman. I did not put my rank, just the initial. 2 weeks later, the panic in the Johnson family reached a fever pitch. I heard about it through the grapevine of the industry. Vanguard had banked everything on getting a piece of the Titan shield pie. When the rejection letter arrived, it sent shockwaves through their boardroom. They were furious. They were confused. They were used to buying their way into deals, used to whining and dining politicians to smooth over the cracks in their proposals. But they couldn't find the person who had rejected them. The review board chairman was a ghost. The Titan Shield project was so compartmented that they couldn't get a meeting. They couldn't find a phone number. Richard Johnson began calling in every favor he had owed in Washington. He hired lobbyists. He hired private investigators. He was obsessed with finding this J. Johnson, who dared to block his salvation. He assumed J. Johnson was some distant relation, or perhaps just a coincidence of naming. He never once considered that the man blocking his $500 billion dream was the same man he had mocked for fixing a lawnmower. I sat in my office, reading a report from one of my security officers. "Sir," the officer said, suppressing a grin, "we have had another inquiry from a lobbying firm representing Vanguard Estates. They are offering a substantial consulting fee if the chairman would agree to a dinner meeting." "What did you tell them?" I asked, signing a purchase order for titanium reinforcement bars. "I told them the chairman is unavailable and that the decision is final. I also told them that further attempts to contact the board outside of official channels would result in them being blacklisted from all future government contracts." "Good," I said. "They are getting desperate, General. The word is, they are on the verge of bankruptcy. They are saying that if they don't get a waiver, they are finished." I looked at the photo of Sarah on my desk. We had a barbecue planned for the weekend. I had promised to fix the deck. "If they are finished," I said, "it is because they built a house of cards, Major. We are building a fortress. There is no room for cards here." The irony was almost suffocating. My father was spending tens of thousands of dollars trying to find the mystery general who held his fate in his hands, searching high and low in the corridors of power. He should have just checked his own trash can. The stage was set. The tension was winding tight. And then, the invitation to the retirement party arrived. It was not a gesture of love. It was a summons to witness their final, desperate attempt to project strength before the collapse. They invited me to humiliate me, to use me as a prop to show how successful the twins were by comparison. They had no idea that I was not walking into the lion's den. I was the lion. And I was bringing the whole jungle with me. The week before the retirement party, the air in the Vanguard Estates boardroom must have smelled of panic sweat and burnt coffee. I was not there, but I knew the numbers. My intelligence reports on the company were more detailed than their own quarterly filings. Vanguard was dead. They just had not laid down yet. Richard and the twins had made a colossal error, seduced by the hype of the crypto market. They had leveraged 40% of the company's liquid assets into a proprietary digital currency called Vanguard Coin. It was supposed to be the future of real estate transactions. Instead, it was a rug pull. The value had plummeted by 95% in 3 days. They were bleeding cash. The banks were calling in loans. The creditors were circling. The only thing that could save them was a massive influx of guaranteed government money. They needed Project Titan Shield. They needed that subcontract. but their bid had been rejected by the mysterious J. Johnson. So, they pivoted to Plan B corruption. My sources told me that Richard had pulled every string he had left to secure the attendance of Senator Arthur Sterling at his retirement dinner. Sterling was the chairman of the Senate Defense Committee. He held the purse strings. If Richard could charm him, bribe him, or blackmail him, maybe Sterling could override the rejection and hand Vanguard the contract on a silver platter. It was a Hail Mary pass thrown by a desperate man. But they needed insurance. They needed to look perfect. And nothing makes a person look more successful than standing next to someone who is a failure. That was my role. I was the prop. I was sitting in my kitchen in D.C., drinking black coffee and reading the digital invitation on my tablet, when Sarah walked in. She was wearing her running gear, looking fresh and sane, a stark contrast to the toxicity emanating from the screen. "You are not actually going, are you?" she asked, leaning over my shoulder. "I have to," I said. "Why?" she asked, putting her hands on my shoulders. "They just want to use you, James. They treat you like a punchline. You are a major general in the United States Army. You do not need to sit there and eat their cold chicken while they make fun of your suit." "It is not about the chicken, Sarah," I said, turning to look at her. "It is about closure. For 25 years. I have let them define the narrative. I have let them tell the world that I am the black sheep. I have let them think they won." "You did win, James," she said softly. "Look at this house. Look at your life. You won." "I know," I said, "but they do not know. And, more importantly, they are about to try and compromise Arthur Sterling. I cannot let that happen. Arthur is a good man. If he walks into that room blind, Richard will try to compromise him. I need to be the firewall." Sarah sighed. The resignation of a military spouse who knows when her husband has made up his mind. "Fine, but if they say one word about your shoes, I am driving up there and keying their Ferraris." "Deal," I smiled, 2 days before the party. I had a scheduled briefing with Senator Sterling at the Pentagon. Arthur Sterling was a lion of the Senate, a man with a mane of white hair and a reputation for absolute integrity. We were in my office, the walls lined with maps and classified logistical readouts. The door was locked. The soundproofing was active. "General," Arthur said, shaking my hand warmly. "Or should I say, the architect." "Senator," I nodded. "Please, sit down." Arthur took a seat, looking around the room. "I have read the latest reports on the Nevada site. Impressive work. James, you are under budget and ahead of schedule. The President is very pleased. He calls you the invisible hand of national security." "We try to keep it quiet, sir," I said. "Infrastructure is not sexy, but it keeps the lights on." "Indeed," Arthur said. He leaned forward, his expression shifting from professional to personal. "Now, I have a curious situation, James. I received an invitation to a retirement dinner in New York this Saturday for a Richard Johnson of Vanguard Estates. Persistent fellow. He has been donating to my campaign fund aggressively for months." I leaned back in my chair. "I know. He is my father." Arthur blinked. He froze. "I beg your pardon?" "Richard Johnson is my father," I repeated. "Lucas and Julian Johnson are my brothers." Arthur stared at me. Then he looked at the nameplate on my desk, Major General James Johnson. He looked back at me, his eyes widening as the pieces fell into place. "Good God," Arthur whispered. "I never made the connection. Johnson is such a common name, and you well. You are you, and they are. They are them," I finished for him. "We are estranged, have been for 25 years." "I see," Arthur said slowly. "So, when Richard Johnson has been bending my ear about his disappointing son, who works as a mechanic." "He is talking about me," I said. Arthur let out a low whistle. And when he talks about the faceless bureaucrat who rejected his bid for the Titan Shield subcontract, that was also me, I said. Arthur sat back, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a man who appreciates a good strategic ambush. This is Shakespearean, James, truly. So, what is the play? Do I decline the invitation? No, I said. I want you to go. Go. Yes, go as his guest. Let him wine and dine you. Let him think he has you in his pocket. Let him introduce you to his successful sons. And you? Arthur asked. I will be there, I said. Standing in the corner, wearing a cheap suit, playing the role of the disappointment one last time. And then, I said, when he asks you to overrule the rejection, when he tries to use his power to crush the faceless bureaucrat, you can introduce him to the man who actually runs the show. Arthur laughed. It was a deep, belly laugh. James, you are a wicked man. I love it. I will see you in New York. I will bring my dress blues. I assume you will be bringing yours. I will bring them, I said. But I won't wear them. Not at first. Understood, Arthur said, standing up. This is going to be the most interesting dinner I have attended in 20 years. The day of the party. I took the train to New York. I did not take a government jet. I did not take a limo. I rode Amtrak, sitting in coach, watching the landscape of New Jersey slide by. I arrived at Penn Station and walked to a military supply store in Midtown that I knew well. I needed to check my uniform. The store smelled of canvas and brass polish. The old man behind the counter, a retired sergeant major, nodded at me. General, he said, good to see you. Good to see you, Top, I replied. I went to the back room where my dress blues were hanging. I had sent them ahead. They were immaculate. The midnight blue fabric was flawless. The gold stripe down the trouser leg was sharp enough to cut glass. On the shoulders, the two silver stars of a major general gleamed under the fluorescent lights. On the chest, the rack of ribbons told the story of my life. The silver star, the bronze star with valor, the purple heart, the Legion of Merit. I ran my hand over the fabric. It was tempting to put it on right then, to walk into the plaza looking like a god of war, to end the charade before it began. But that would be too easy. That would be tactical, but not strategic. I needed them to show their true colors first. I needed the audience to see the cruelty before they saw the justice. Pack it up, Top, I said. I will carry it. You're not wearing it, sir, the sergeant major asked, confused. Not yet, I said. I have to wear a disguise first. I changed into my civilian disguise, the gray suit I had bought at a discount outlet. It fit poorly. The sleeves were a fraction too long. The fabric was slightly shiny. It was perfect. I put the uniform in a garment bag and carried it with me. As I walked out of the store, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lucas, James. Make sure you dress appropriately tonight. Do not embarrass us. We have VIPs. Senator Sterling is coming. If you look like a hobo, security will remove you. Also, use the service entrance on 58th Street. We do not want you cluttering up the main lobby while the senator arrives. I stopped on the sidewalk. The city moved around me, loud and indifferent. I looked at the text, service entrance. I typed back, I will be there on time. I did not agree to the service entrance. I hailed a cab. The Plaza Hotel, I said. Main entrance. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. Big night. You have no idea, I said. I sat back, watching the city lights blur. I thought about the bridge in Iraq. I thought about the boy hiding his trophy under the bed. I thought about Sarah. The trap was set. The players were in motion. Richard and his sons were walking toward a cliff. Convinced, they were marching toward a throne. I was just the mechanic. But tonight, I was going to dismantle their engine, piece by piece. The spotlight that had been searching the room finally found its mark. It hit me with the force of a physical blow, blinding white and hot against my skin. I blinked, my pupils constricting, forcing my eyes to adjust. To the rest of the room, I was suddenly illuminated. A solitary figure in a stained gray suit, standing by a potted palm. To me, it felt like being caught in the searchlights of a guard tower. "And here he is," my father's voice boomed through the speakers, dripping with a theatrical warmth that made my stomach turn. "James, my humble son." The word humble was not a compliment in Richard Johnson's lexicon. Humble was a synonym for weak. It was a code word for failure. "Come up here, James." Richard beckoned, waving his hand. "Do not be shy. Come join your family." I hesitated for a fraction of a second. My tactical mind ran the scenario. I could turn around and walk out the service exit. I could leave them to their self-congratulatory feast. But that would be a retreat. And I had promised myself. I had promised Sarah. And I had promised the 18-year-old boy who walked out into the cold 25 years ago that I would never retreat from this man again. I began to walk. The crowd parted. It was not a gesture of respect. It was the way a herd moves away from a sick animal. I could hear the rustle of silk and the murmur of voices as I passed. I kept my head high, my eyes fixed on the podium. I walked with the measured, rhythmic stride I had perfected on the parade grounds of West Point, though no one here recognized the cadence. To them, it was just a stiff walk. I ascended the 3 stairs to the stage. The lights were even brighter up here. I could smell the heat coming off the bulbs. I stepped into the semicircle of Power Richard in the center. Lucas and Julian flanking him like well-dressed hyenas. Richard put his arm around my shoulder. His grip was tight, possessive. It was the grip of a man claiming ownership of a prop. He smelled of sandalwood cologne and aged whiskey. It was the smell of my childhood. A scent that used to trigger fear. Now, it just triggered a dull, aching pity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard addressed the room, keeping me firmly in his grip. "You have all met Lucas and Julian. They are the sharks. They are the ones who will double your investments in the next quarter." Applause rippled through the room. Lucas and Julian preened, flashing their bleached smiles. "But James here," Richard continued, his voice dropping to a mock, confidential tone. "James is a different breed. You see, 25 years ago, James had a choice. He could have gone to Harvard. He could have learned how to build empires. But James looked at all this." Richard gestured widely at the crystal chandeliers and the velvet drapes, and he said no. A few chuckles from the audience. "James preferred Greece," Richard said, smiling down at me like a benevolent king explaining the antics of a court jester. "He liked to get his hands dirty. He wanted to fix things. Can you imagine a Johnson, with a wrench in his hand, crawling under a sink?" The laughter grew louder. It was a polite, cruel laughter, the kind of laughter that excludes. "I tried to tell him," Richard went on, playing to the crowd. "I told him, 'Son, we hire people to fix sinks. We do not fix them ourselves.' But James was determined. He wanted to go his own way. He wanted to work with his hands, so he went off to join the Army engineers, to dig ditches, to pour concrete. He made it sound so small. He made the Corps of Engineers sound like a weekend landscaping crew. He stripped away the strategy, the danger, the magnitude of what we did, and reduced it to manual labor. And look at him now," Richard sighed, giving my shoulder a patronizing squeeze. 42 years old, still working for the government, still fixing things that other people break. It is honest work, I suppose, but it is not vanguard work." He released me, leaving me standing alone in the center of the stage. "But we love him anyway, don't we?" Richard asked the crowd, soliciting pity. "We love the black sheep." I stood there, my face impassive. I did not smile. I did not frown. I let his words wash over me like rain on a tank. Inside, I was counting. 1, 2, 3. Lucas stepped forward. He reached out and took the microphone from the stand. He moved with the loose, swaying confidence of a man who is slightly drunk and entirely entitled. "You know, Dad is being too nice," Lucas said, his voice amplified and sharp. He turned to me, his eyes glassy and malicious. "We were worried about you, James. Seriously. We did not know if you could afford the train ticket to get here tonight." The crowd roared. Lucas waited for the laughter to die down before delivering his next strike. "I mean, look at this suit," Lucas said, reaching out to flick the lapel of my jacket. "Is this polyester? Did you get it at a fire sale? And that stain very classy. It really completes the struggling laborer look." He leaned in close, the microphone amplifying his whisper, so the whole room could hear. "Tell us, James, what is it you actually do? Dad says engineers. But come on, are you the guy who holds the stop sign at road construction sites? Are you the one unclogging the toilets at the barracks?" "I serve my country," I said. My voice was not amplified, but it carried. Lucas laughed. "He serves his country. Did you hear that he sounds like a recruiting poster? Listen, little brother, I have a proposition for you. Julian and I were talking. We have a warehouse in Queens. It is in a rough neighborhood. We need a night watchman, someone to walk the perimeter, shine a flashlight, scare off the rats. It pays $15 an hour. That is probably a raise for you. Right. Think about it," Julian chimed in, not needing a microphone to be heard over the snickering crowd. "You could actually wear a uniform and feel important. We will even buy you a badge." The humiliation was total. They were stripping me naked in front of the most powerful people in New York. They were reducing my entire existence, my sacrifices, my rank, my life, to a punchline about a security guard. I looked at the faces in the audience. I saw bankers I had investigated for fraud. I saw real estate moguls whose developments I had blocked for environmental violations. They were all laughing. They were enjoying the show, to them. I was just a prop in the Johnson family theater. I looked at Lucas. "I do not need a job, Lucas." "Everyone needs a job, James," Richard interrupted, taking back control of the moment. He sensed that the mockery had gone on long enough, and it was time for the grand finale, the act of benevolence. Richard reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo. He pulled out a long, rectangular slip of paper, a check. "I knew you would be proud," Richard said, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. "Too proud to ask for help. But a father knows. I know you are struggling. I know the government pays peanuts, and I do not want my son living in squalor." He held the check up for the crowd to see. "So," Richard announced, "I have decided to give you a retirement gift. Not for me, but for you. To help you get back on your feet." He walked over to me and held the check out. "It is $10,000. James," Richard said, loud enough for the back row to hear. "Take it, buy yourself a new suit, pay off your rent, maybe take a vacation. Just take it." $10,000. The number hung in the air. To the people in this room, $10,000 was the price of a handbag. It was a bottle of wine. It was nothing, but Richard was offering it to me as if it were the keys to the kingdom. It was not a gift. It was a dismissal. It was a bribe to go away and stay away. I looked at the check. I saw the jagged handwriting. I saw the Vanguard Estates logo in the corner. I did not move my hand. "Take it," Richard urged, shaking the paper slightly. "Don't be a fool." The room went silent. The laughter died away. The tension shifted from amusement to awkwardness. Why wasn't the beggar taking the coin? I looked up from the check and met my father's eyes. They were impatient, cold. "You price my honor at $10,000, I asked. My voice was calm, steady, and cold as the bottom of the ocean. Richard blinked. He had not expected me to speak. He had expected gratitude. He had expected shame. "Excuse me," Richard snapped. "You think," I said, projecting my voice so that it bounced off the back walls of the ballroom, "that you can buy my dignity for the price of a used car. You think that because I do not wear Italian silk, I am for sale." "Don't you dare take that tone with me," Richard hissed, his face flushing red. "I am trying to help you, you ungrateful wretch." "You are not trying to help me," I said. "You are trying to buy a clear conscience. You want to pay me off so you can tell your friends that you took care of the slow son. You want to erase me." "I should have erased you years ago," Richard shouted, losing his composure. The mask of the benevolent patriarch slipped, revealing the angry, petty tyrant underneath. "You are a failure, James. You are a nothing. $10,000 for a failure like you. That is a fortune. You should be on your knees thanking me." "I have never been on my knees in my life," I said, "and I certainly won't start for you." "Then get out," Richard screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "Get out of my sight. Take the money or don't. But get the hell off my stage. You are embarrassing this family." Lucas stepped forward, looking like he was about to shove me. "You heard him, trash. Get out." I stood my ground. I did not flinch. I prepared myself. If Lucas touched me, I would have to neutralize him. It would be effortless. A simple wrist lock, a pressure point. I calculated the angle. But before Lucas could make contact, a sound cut through the tension like a thunderclap. The massive double doors at the far end of the ballroom flew open. They hit the walls with a resounding boom that shook the crystal glasses on the tables. Every head in the room turned. A phalanx of men in black suits poured into the room. They moved with a precision that was unmistakable. They were not hotel security. They were not private contractors. They wore earpieces and lapel pins. They moved in a diamond formation, clearing a path through the center of the room with efficient, silent authority. "Make a hole," one of the lead agents commanded, his voice sharp. "Clear the way," the guests scrambled back, knocking over chairs in their haste to get out of the path of this human wedge. Behind the agents, walking with a slow, deliberate gait, was a man. He was flanked by two military officers in full dress blues. My father froze, his hand, still holding the check, dropped to his side. Lucas stopped mid-stride. The air in the room seemed to be sucked out, replaced by a vacuum of pure, unadulterated shock. The cavalry had arrived, and they were not here for the appetizers. The silence that descended upon the grand ballroom of the plaza was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a vacuum, the kind that exists in the split second before a thunderclap rolls over a valley. Senator Arthur Sterling stood in the doorway, framed by the mahogany gems, like a portrait of old-world authority. He was a man who did not need to shout to be heard. He wore a tuxedo that fit him with the ease of a second skin. But it was his bearing that commanded attention. He stood tall, his white hair swept back, his eyes scanning the room with the predatory intelligence of a man who had survived 3 decades of Washington politics. Flanking him were 2 men who were visibly not part of the civilian world. They were Army colonels. They wore their dress blue uniforms, the dark midnight fabric stark against the sea of black tuxedos. Their chests were heavy with ribbons that caught the light rows of colors that signified campaigns, valor, and service. Gold stripes ran down their trouser legs. They did not look at the guests. They looked straight ahead, their faces carved from granite, their hands resting precisely at their sides. The energy in the room shifted instantly. The petty cruelty of my father's speech, the mockery of my brothers, the sneering laughter of the crowd had all evaporated, replaced by a desperate, palpable hunger for proximity to power. My father, Richard Johnson, was the first to react, The transformation was grotesque. One moment, he was a red-faced tyrant, screaming at his son to get off the stage. The next, he was a fawning courtier. The rage vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of obsequious delight that was almost painful to watch. He dropped the hand that had been pointing at the door and smoothed his jacket. He ran a hand through his hair. He practically vibrated with the need to be seen. "Senator Sterling!" Richard cried out, his voice cracking slightly. He scrambled down the stairs of the stage, moving faster than a man of 65 should be able to move. "Senator, you made it. What an incredible honor. What a surprise." Lucas and Julian were right behind him. They had abandoned their postures of arrogance and were now tripping over themselves to get to the floor. They buttoned their jackets. They fixed their ties. They looked like hungry dogs who had just heard the dinner bell. "Senator," Richard gushed, reaching the bottom of the steps and rushing toward the entrance. "I cannot tell you how much this means to the Johnson family, to Vanguard Estates. Please, please, come in. Let me get you a drink. Let me introduce you to the board." Richard reached out to shake Arthur's hand, his own hand trembling with anticipation. This was it. This was the moment he secured the Titan Shield subcontract. This was the moment he saved his company. "Senator, I want you to meet the future of Vanguard," Richard babbled, gesturing frantically to the twins. "My sons, Lucas and Julian. They are the ones spearheading our new initiatives. Sharp minds, brilliant strategists. Just like I told you in my letters." Lucas extended his hand, flashing his teeth. "Senator Sterling, it is a privilege. I have followed your work on the Defense Committee for years. Truly inspiring." "An honor, sir," Julian added, trying to edge his brother out of the way. "We have some ideas about infrastructure that we would love to run by you." I stood alone on the stage, watching the scene unfold from above. I was still the stain in the room. I was still the man in the cheap suit with the wine on his lapel. But I saw something that Richard and his sons did not. I saw Arthur Sterling's eyes. Arthur did not slow down. He did not smile. He did not extend his hand. He walked right through them. It was a master class in power. Arthur Sterling did not acknowledge Richard Johnson's existence. He did not look at the extended hand. He did not look at Lucas or Julian. He looked through them as if they were made of glass, as if they were nothing more than dust motes floating in the air of the ballroom. Richard was left standing with his hand hanging in mid-air, a frozen rictus of a smile on his face. He blinked, confused. "Senator," Richard tried again, his voice faltering. "Senator, perhaps you didn't hear me. I am Richard Johnson, the host." Arthur continued to walk. His stride was purposeful, eating up the distance between the door and the stage. The two colonels marched in lockstep behind him, their boots striking the parquet floor with a rhythmic, heavy thud that echoed in the silent room. Thud, thud, thud. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Guests who held glasses of champagne worth $100 backed away, sensing that something was happening that was far above their pay grade. Richard turned, panic starting to set in. He saw Arthur heading toward the stage, toward me. A look of pure horror crossed my father's face. He thought Arthur was coming to reprimand me. He thought that I, the embarrassment, the failure, was about to offend the most powerful man in the room. He thought I was going to ruin everything. Richard scrambled after them, practically running to catch up. "Senator, please," Richard called out, breathless. "Please, do not pay any attention to the man on the stage. That is just James, my youngest. He is a bit simple. He has some issues. We were just asking him to leave. He is nobody. Please, let me escort you to the VIP table. We have a seat reserved for you right next to me." "He is leaving right now, Senator," Lucas yelled, trying to be helpful. "Security is on the way. He won't bother you." Arthur did not stop. He reached the base of the stairs. I looked down at him. Arthur looked up at me. For a moment, nobody breathed. The tension was so thick it felt like physical pressure against the eardrums. Richard had caught up to the group and was standing a few feet behind the colonels, wringing his hands, his face pale and sweaty. "Senator," Richard whispered, terrified. "He is just a mechanic. He doesn't know how to talk to people like you. Please, come this way." Arthur Sterling ignored the frantic pleading behind him. He placed one foot on the first step, then the second, then the third. He walked onto the stage. He stood 3 feet away from me. The 2 colonels followed him up, flanking him, and turned to face me. I stood at attention. It was a reflex. My spine straightened, my chin lifted. My hands curled into loose fists at the seams of my trousers. The slouch of the failure vanished, replaced by the rigid discipline of a career officer. Arthur Sterling, the man who held the purse strings of the United States military. The man Richard Johnson had spent months trying to bribe, straightened his own posture. Then, Arthur did something that made Richard Johnson's heart stop. Arthur Sterling snapped a crisp, perfect salute. It was not a casual wave. It was a formal military salute, executed with precision and deep respect simultaneously. The 2 colonels behind him slammed their heels together, a sound like a gunshot, and saluted. Their hands snapped to the brims of their covers. Their eyes locked on mine. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. You could have heard a heartbeat. Richard's mouth fell open. Lucas dropped his glass of scotch. It shattered on the floor. But no one looked at it. I held the moment for a second, letting the image burn into their retinas. Then, I slowly raised my right hand and returned the salute. "At ease," I said softly. Arthur dropped his hand. The colonels dropped theirs. Arthur took a step forward. He did not use a microphone, but he possessed a voice trained in the Senate chamber, a voice designed to reach the back rows of a gallery. He spoke clearly, enunciating every syllable, so there could be no mistake. "Major General Johnson," Arthur said, his voice ringing out like a bell. The title hung in the air, Major General. Richard let out a small, strangled sound, like a dying animal. "Major what?" Arthur continued, ignoring the gasp from the audience. "I did not expect you to arrive before me, sir. I assumed you would be coming directly from the White House briefing." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. White House briefing. "The Pentagon is awaiting your final directive for Operation Titan, General," Arthur said, looking me in the eye with absolute deference. "The Joint Chiefs have reviewed your modifications to the Strategic Infrastructure Plan. They are brilliant, as always, but they cannot move a single asset without your signature. The President asked me personally to ensure you receive the final dossier tonight." Arthur reached out, and one of the colonels handed him a thick, black leather folder, stamped with gold letters, "Top Secret / Eyes Only." Arthur held the folder out to me with both hands, like an offering to a king. "We are at your command, General," Arthur said. I looked at the folder. Then I looked past Arthur, down into the crowd. I saw my father. He was frozen, his face a mask of absolute incomprehension. His brain was trying to process the data and failing. The son had just offered $10,000 to leave. The son he had called a failure. The son he had mocked for fixing toilets. Major General, the Pentagon, the President. Lucas looked like he was going to be sick. His face was gray. He was looking at the stars on the uniforms of the colonels, then looking at me, trying to reconcile the image of his loser brother with the man receiving a top-secret dossier from a United States senator. I took the folder from Arthur. It felt heavy in my hands. "Thank you, Senator," I said, my voice calm, authoritative, the voice I used to command divisions. "I will review it tonight. You can tell the President that the timeline holds. We do not delay for anyone." Understood, General, Arthur said. And Arthur, I added, breaking protocol slightly. Yes, General. You are late, I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. Arthur smiled back, a genuine expression of respect. Traffic was murder, sir, and I had to wade through a lot of refuse to get to the stage. He cast a withering glance back at Richard and the twins. The realization hit Richard like a physical slap. The refuse. The garbage. He was talking about them. Wait, Richard stammered, stepping forward, his voice trembling. Wait a minute. Senator, there must be a mistake. This is James. This is my son, James. He is a mechanic. He fixes things. Arthur turned slowly on his heel to face my father. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold steel of a man who destroys opposition for a living. A mechanic, Arthur repeated, his voice dripping with ice. Is that what you think? He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Mr. Johnson, Arthur said, projecting his voice to the rafters. The man standing before you is the commander of the United States Army Corps of Engineers. He oversees 50,000 troops. He manages a budget that makes your entire company look like a child's piggy bank. He is the architect of the national defense strategy for the next 50 years. Arthur took a step toward Richard, forcing my father to shrink back. He does not just fix things, Mr. Johnson, Arthur said. He decides what gets built. And more importantly, he decides who builds it. The connection snapped into place. I saw it happen in Richard's eyes. The rejection letter, the J. Johnson, the mysterious chairman who had blocked the Vanguard bid. Richard looked at me with pure terror. He looked at the man he had just insulted, the man he had just tried to buy off with a check for $10,000. You, Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. You are the chairman. I stepped forward to the edge of the stage. The lights were hot, but I felt cold. I felt powerful. I am, I said. The room erupted. Whispers turned into shouts. People were standing up, craning their necks. The narrative of the evening had been shattered. The black sheep was the shepherd, and the wolves were suddenly very, very small. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I am, 2 syllables. That was all it took to dismantle the reality my father had constructed for 40 years. Richard Johnson stared at me. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and filled with a desperate, frantic denial. It was the look of a man who sees a tsunami approaching and tries to convince himself it is just a large wave. His brain was misfiring. He could not reconcile the image of James the failure, James the grease monkey, with the man standing before him, who commanded the respect of the United States Senate. General, Richard stammered, a nervous, jagged laugh escaping his lips. He looked at Sterling, then back at me, then back at Sterling. Senator, please, I think there has been a misunderstanding, a mix-up in the files, perhaps. He gestured at me with a shaking hand, the check for $10,000 still fluttering between his fingers like a flag of surrender. This is James, Richard explained, his voice pleading for the world to return to normal. He is my son. I know him. He is a laborer. He fixes roads. He works with concrete and shovels. He is not a general. He is just James. Arthur Sterling turned his head slowly to look at my father. The look was not one of anger, but of profound, icy disappointment. It was the look a judge gives a criminal who lies after the verdict has already been read. Fixes roads, Arthur repeated, the question slicing through the room. Is that what you think the Army Corps of Engineers does, Mr. Johnson? You think they are a roadside maintenance crew? Arthur took a step closer to Richard, invading his personal space, using his height and presence to dominate the smaller man. You are speaking about the commanding general of a force that builds the infrastructure for the entire free world, Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. You are speaking about the man who oversees the construction of missile silos, flood defense systems, and forward operating bases in hostile territory. You are speaking about the officer who holds the largest strategic discretionary budget in the United States government. Arthur paused, letting the scope of that authority sink in. He does not fix roads, Mr. Johnson, Arthur said. He redraws maps. Richard flinched, as if he had been struck. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face for the boy he used to yell at. He could not find him. But, Richard whispered, but he never told me. Why would he? Arthur asked. Did you ever ask him? Did you ever look past the grease on his hands to see the stars on his shoulders? Then, Arthur delivered the coup de grace, the piece of information that would shatter not just Richard's pride, but his bank account. Tell me, Mr. Johnson, Arthur said, his voice ringing out clearly across the silent ballroom. You have been complaining all evening about the bureaucracy, about the unfair rejection of your bid for the Titan Shield project. You have been searching high and low for the chairman of the review board. You have spent thousands on private investigators to find this J. Johnson. Arthur pointed a finger directly at my chest. He is standing right in front of you, Arthur declared. James is the chairman. James is the one who reviewed your file. James is the one who rejected it last week because your company lacks the competence to serve this nation. He did not tell you that, either. The gasp from the audience was audible. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. The realization hit Richard like a physical blow. His knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the podium for support. You, Richard croaked, staring at me with horror. You are the chairman, you blocked the deal. I did, I said. But that deal, Richard stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. That deal is everything. We need that capital. If we do not get that contract... I know, I said. You go bankrupt. Richard looked at Lucas and Julian. The twins were standing by the edge of the stage, pale as ghosts. They were trembling. The arrogance that had defined them for their entire lives had evaporated, leaving behind two terrified children in expensive suits. They had spent the last hour mocking the man who held the pen that could sign their death warrant. They had called me a security guard. They had offered me a job watching rats. And now they realized that I was the one who decided if they would have a company to work for in the morning. Julian dropped his glass. It hit the floor and shattered. The sound loud and sharp in the silence. He did not even look down. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The movement caused the security detail to tense up, but they stood down when they saw what I was retrieving. It was a small, velvet box. I opened it. Inside lay 2 silver stars, the insignia of a major general. I took them out. My movements were slow, deliberate. I did not rush. I wanted them to see every second of this. I walked over to the microphone stand where Richard was clinging to the wood like a drowning man. I stood next to him. You asked me why I did not tell you, I said, my voice amplified, calm and steady. You asked why I let you believe I was nothing. I pushed the pin of the first star through the cheap fabric of my left lapel. Click. I did not tell you, I continued, because I wanted to know the truth. I wanted to know if you could love a son who had nothing to offer you but himself. I pushed the pin of the second star through the right lapel. Click. I smoothed the lapel. The silver stars caught the spotlight, gleaming against the dull gray of the suit. They looked out of place. And yet, they were the only things that made sense. I turned to face Richard. I wanted to see if you measured a man by his character, or by his portfolio, I said. I wanted to see if I was your son, or just an asset, and tonight, you gave me my answer. Richard looked at the stars. He looked at my face. He opened his mouth to speak, But no words came out. He looked like a man whose entire worldview had just collapsed on top of him. "James," he finally whispered, his voice shaking. "I didn't know. If I had known. If you had known what—" I asked, cutting him off. "You would have treated me with respect. You would have bragged about me. You would have used my rank to get contracts." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That is exactly why I hid it, Richard. Because respect is not something you give only when it is profitable. Respect is what you give when you have nothing to gain." I looked down at his hand. He was still clutching the check, the $10,000 he had thrown at me like a bone to a dog. "And regarding that," I said, pointing to the check. Richard looked down at the paper in his hand, as if he had forgotten it was there. He made a move to hide it, to put it back in his pocket. But it was too late. I reached out and took the microphone off the stand. I walked to the edge of the stage, closer to the audience, closer to the people who had laughed at me 5 minutes ago. "My father offered me $10,000 to leave," I told the room. "He thought that was a fortune to me. He thought that some would buy my dignity." I turned back to Richard. "I manage a budget of $500 billion a year," I said. The number rolled through the room like a shockwave. "I sign authorization forms for equipment that costs more than this entire hotel. I allocate funds for disaster relief that saves thousands of lives. The decisions I make move economies." I walked back to Richard and looked him in the eye. "I do not want your money, Richard," I said. "Your $10,000 is not a gift. It is an insult. And frankly, looking at the financial reports of Vanguard Estates that I reviewed last week, I think you need it more than I do." The crowd gasped again. It was a brutal, public undressing of the Johnson family myth. I had just revealed to the entire New York elite that Vanguard was broke. "James," Lucas cried out from the side, stepping forward. "James, stop! You cannot say that you are ruining us." I looked at Lucas. "I am not ruining you. Lucas, you ruined yourselves. You bet the company on a scam because you were greedy. You cut corners on the Titan bid because you were lazy. I am just reading the report." I turned back to the crowd. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The guests were no longer looking at Richard with admiration. They were looking at him with disgust. They were whispering, pointing. I could hear snippets of their conversations. "He treated his own son like that. He didn't know his son was a general. Vanguard is broke. We need to pull our investments. What a horrible man." The tide had turned. The court of public opinion, which Richard had spent his life manipulating, had just handed down a guilty verdict. Richard stood alone in the center of the stage. The spotlight that he loved so much was now an interrogation lamp. He looked small. He looked old. He looked stripped of everything that made him Richard Johnson. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw tears in his eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of absolute defeat. "I built this," Richard whispered, his voice cracking. "I built this for you, for the family." "No," I said softly, so only he could hear. "You built it for yourself, and you built it on sand." I placed the microphone back on the stand. I had said what I needed to say. I had revealed the truth. "I am leaving now," I said to Richard. "I have a briefing to read, and I believe you have some explaining to do to your investors." I turned to walk away. Arthur Sterling stepped aside to let me pass, snapping another salute as I went by. The two colonels fell in behind me, forming a protective guard. I took 3 steps toward the stairs, behind me. I heard a sound. It was a gasp, followed by a heavy, dull thud. "Dad!" Julian screamed. I stopped. I turned around. Richard Johnson was on the floor. He was clutching his chest, his face twisted in agony. The check for $10,000 lay on the floor beside him, crumpled and forgotten. The stress, the shock, the public humiliation, the realization that his empire was crumbling, it was too much for his heart. "Call 911!" Lucas shrieked, dropping to his knees beside his father. "Help! Somebody help!" The room erupted into chaos. People were screaming. Security guards were rushing the stage. I stood there, looking at the man who had thrown my trophy in the trash. The man who had told me I was dead to him. He was gasping for air, his face turning a shade of gray that I had seen too many times on the battlefield. For a moment, the general warred with the sun. The general said he is a casualty of his own making. Walk away. The son said he is your father. I looked at Arthur. Arthur gave me a subtle nod. I did not walk away. But I did not run to him with the panic of a child. I walked back to him with the calm precision of a medic. I knelt beside him. Lucas tried to push me away. "Get away from him, you did this." "Stand down," I ordered, my voice cutting through his panic like a knife. I didn't even look at Lucas. I looked at Richard. I checked his pulse. It was erratic, thready. "Give him space," I commanded the gathering crowd. "Back up." Richard looked up at me. His eyes were unfocused, filled with pain and fear. He gripped my lapel, his fingers brushing against the silver star I had just pinned there. "James," he wheezed, the company." Even while dying, he was worried about the company. "Be quiet, Richard," I said, my voice surprisingly gentle. "Save your breath." I looked up at one of the colonels. "Get the medic from the detail, now." "Yes, General." I looked back down at my father. He was staring at the star on my chest. He traced the shape of it with a trembling finger. "General," he whispered. It was the first time he had ever used my title. It sounded like an apology. It sounded like a surrender. "Yes," I said. "General." I held his hand as the sirens began to wail in the distance. I did not forgive him. Forgiveness is a process, not a switch. But in that moment, seeing him broken and small on the floor of his own palace, I realized that the revenge I thought I wanted was not sweet. It was just heavy. The truth was a verdict. Yes. But the sentence was harder to execute than I had imagined. The paramedics had lifted my father into a plush, velvet armchair brought over by the hotel staff. His face was the color of old parchment, and his breathing was shallow. But the immediate crisis of his heart had passed, settled by a shot of nitroglycerin and the stubborn refusal of a narcissist to leave the stage before the final curtain. He sat there, a diminished king on a borrowed throne, surrounded by the ruins of his own ego. I stood before him, the silver stars on my lapel catching the unforgiving light of the chandelier. The crowd had instinctively pulled back, creating a wide, circular, demilitarized zone around us. They were no longer guests at a party. They were witnesses to a tribunal. The silence was absolute, heavy with the weight of 25 years of unsaid things. Richard looked up at me. His eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were swimming with confusion and a desperate, clawing need to salvage the narrative. He reached out a trembling hand, grasping at the sleeve of my cheap suit, the suit he had mocked only minutes ago. "James," he wheezed, his voice thin and reedy. "My son, why did you hide this from me? We are family. If you had just told me, we could have done so much together." I looked down at his hand, then at his face. The question hung in the air, toxic and pathetic. We are family. It was the last refuge of a scoundrel. The card played when all other leverage had evaporated. I gently removed his hand from my sleeve. I did not shove him. I simply disconnected him, as one might unplug a broken appliance. "Family," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. That is a curious word for you to use. Richard, you ask why I hid it. I hid it because I needed to know if I had a father, or just a hiring manager. I took a step back, addressing him, but pitching my voice so that Lucas and Julian, cowering behind his chair, could hear every syllable. You say we are family, I continued, my tone level and dispassionate. But family is not a blood type. Family is not a last name on a letterhead. Family are the people who answer the phone when you have nothing. Family are the people who sit in the front row of your graduation when you are a nobody. Family are the people who help you stand when you are bleeding in the mud, not the ones who stand on a balcony and laugh while you walk away into the cold. Richard flinched. He remembered the balcony. He remembered the laughter. I have a family. Richard, I said, thinking of Sarah, thinking of the quiet evenings on our porch, thinking of the men and women I had served with who would dive on a grenade for me. But none of them are in this room. But I am your father, Richard pleaded, tears streaming down his cheeks. I gave you life. You gave me biology, I corrected him. You gave me a roof, for a while. But you did not give me a life. I built that myself. I built it with the very hands you called dirty. I built it with the mind you called average. And I built it without a single cent of your money or a single ounce of your influence. I turned my gaze to the twins. Lucas and Julian were trying to make themselves invisible. They looked like children who had broken a vase and were waiting for the strap. They were soft. Their hands were manicured. Their suits were bespoke. They had never known a day of true hardship in their lives. And you two, I said. They jumped. Julian actually took a half step back. You want the Titan Shield contract, I stated. You are desperate for it. You need the government to bail you out of your crypto disaster. Lucas looked up, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. He thought, perhaps, that there was still a deal to be made. He thought that money always won in the end. Yes, Lucas stammered. James, General, look, we messed up, we admit it. But business is business, right? If you give us the subcontract, we can turn this around. We can make you a partner, silent partner. We can structure the equity so... I raised a hand, cutting him off. The audacity was breathtaking, even now, facing the barrel of my rank. He was trying to bribe me. I am going to offer you a deal, I said. The room gasped. Arthur Sterling, standing a few feet away, crossed his arms and watched. A knowing look in his eyes. He knew I was not capitulating. He knew I was educating. You want the contract? I asked. Fine. I will grant a provisional waiver for Vanguard Estates to participate in the Nevada site preparation. Richard sat up straighter. Lucas and Julian exchanged a look of disbelief. Had they won? Had the family card actually worked? However, I added, my voice hardening into steel. There is a condition. Anything, Julian said quickly. We will do anything. Name the percentage. I do not want your money, I said. I want your sweat. I pointed a finger at the floor, grounding my demand in reality. The condition is this: you, Lucas, and you, Julian, must personally report to the Nevada site. You will not go as an executive. You will not go as managers. You will go as laborers. Their jaws dropped. You will spend 6 months on the ground. I outlined, describing the terms with the precision of a military operation. You will dig the trenches for the fiber optic cables. You will pour the concrete for the bunker foundations. You will carry the rebar. You will sleep in the container housing with the privates. You will eat in the mess hall. You will wake up at 4 in the morning and work until your hands blister and your backs break. I took a step closer to them, looking deep into their terrified eyes. If you can last 6 months, I said. "If you can prove to me that you understand what it takes to actually build something, rather than just selling what other people build, then I will sign the contract. I will save your company." Silence stretched across the ballroom. It was a test of character, and we all knew the answer before the question had even settled. Lucas looked at his hands. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the idea of physical labor, of sweat, of anonymity, and he recoiled from it as if it were a disease. "I cannot do that," Lucas whispered. "I have a bad back. I have meetings. I am a CEO, James. I cannot be digging ditches." "And you, Julian?" I asked. "It is ridiculous," Julian scoffed, trying to regain some shred of dignity but failing miserably. "We are businessmen. We add value through strategy. You cannot expect us to work like peasants." "Peasants," I repeated the word. "Those peasants are the men and women who secure your freedom. They are the ones who build the roads you drive your Ferraris on." I turned back to the crowd, addressing the room at large. "You see," I said, "they want the profit, but they despise the process. They want the glory, but they fear the work." I turned back to Richard. He had slumped back into his chair, the hope extinguishing in his eyes as he realized his sons were exactly who he had raised them to be, hollow men. "That is why Vanguard Estates will never work on a Project Titan site," I declared. My voice was the voice of the final judgment. "I am placing your company on the indefinite blacklist for all Department of Defense infrastructure contracts." "No," Richard moaned. "James, please. That is a death sentence. You are killing my legacy." "I am not doing this out of revenge, Richard," I said, and I meant it. "I am doing it because of a principle you taught me, though not in the way you intended." I leaned in close to him. "You told me once that the Johnson family only builds the best," I said. "But in my line of work, when we build a fortress, the foundation is everything. If the foundation is cracked, the walls will fall when the enemy comes." I gestured to Lucas and Julian. "These men are your foundation," I said. "They are cracked. They are weak. They are unethical. If I let them pour the concrete for a command bunker, and that bunker fails during a crisis because they cut corners to save a nickel, people die, soldiers die. The nation bleeds." I stood up to my full height, adjusting my jacket. "I will not let American lives be the price of your vanity," I said. "Unethical leaders build dangerous structures, and I do not tolerate danger in my ranks." Arthur Sterling stepped forward. He nodded slowly, a grave expression on his face. "That," Sterling said, his voice carrying the weight of the United States Senate, "is exactly why Congress trusts you, James, and that is why we will never trust them." It was over. The verdict had been rendered. The execution was administrative, but it was total. I looked at my father one last time. He looked like a ghost. He was looking at the check on the floor, the $10,000 that now seemed like a cruel joke. He had lost a $500 billion opportunity because he could not see the value of the man standing in front of him. "Goodbye, Richard," I said. "I hope you find someone to fix your company, but it won't be me." I turned on my heel. "Senator, colonels, let's move out." "After you, General," Arthur said. We walked toward the exit. The crowd parted again. But this time, the energy was different. It was not fear. It was awe. It was the realization that they had been worshiping false idols. And the true power had just walked out the door. I did not look back. I did not need to. I could feel the eyes of my brothers burning into my back. But their heat meant nothing to me anymore. I had walked through fire in the desert. The sparks of their envy were cold by comparison. As we reached the double doors, the silence held. No one clapped. No one spoke. It was the silence of a funeral. And in a way, it was. We were leaving behind the corpse of a reputation, buried under the weight of its own arrogance. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the cool air of the hallway. I took a deep breath. It smelled of floor wax and lilies, but underneath that, I could smell something else. I could smell freedom. 3 months is not a long time in the grand scheme of geological history, but in the world of high finance and fragile egos, it is an eternity. It is enough time for an empire to fall, for a legacy to turn into dust, and for a man to finally find the silence he has been craving for 25 years. The collapse of Vanguard Estates was not the spectacular explosion that the tabloids had hoped for. It was a slow, agonizing suffocation. After the news broke that they had been blacklisted from the Titan Shield project, and after the rumors of their liquidity crisis leaked to the street, the creditors descended like locusts. They did not leave a single crumb. The skyscrapers in Manhattan were sold off to a Chinese conglomerate for pennies on the dollar. The private jets were repossessed. The brand that my father had spent 40 years polishing was stripped for parts and dissolved into the ether of bankruptcy court. I did not watch the proceedings on television. I did not read the articles in the Wall Street Journal that analyzed the hubris of the Johnson family. I had other things to do. I had a job. But I did hear about the mansion, the estate in Westchester, the cold marble mausoleum where I had spent my childhood, was put on the auction block. It was purchased by a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley who planned to bulldoze the house and turn the grounds into an organic farm. When I heard that, I smiled. There was a poetic justice in knowing that the garage, where I had learned to fix engines, the garage my father had despised, would soon be a field for growing something real. My brothers, Lucas and Julian, learned the hardest lesson of all gravity works. When you fall from the top of the pyramid, and you have no parachute of talent to slow your descent, you hit the bottom with a sickening crunch. They were not destitute. They did not starve. But they suffered a fate that, to them, was far worse than poverty. They became employees. Lucas found a job as a regional sales manager for a mid-tier construction supply firm in New Jersey. He now answers to a 28-year-old vice president who makes him log his hours and humiliates him in Zoom meetings for missing his quotas. I ran into a mutual acquaintance who told me that Lucas looks 10 years older. He has stopped bleaching his teeth. He has stopped wearing Armani. He wears a badge on a lanyard and drives a leased sedan. Julian fared no better. He is working for a rival real estate firm, but not as a partner. He is a client relations associate, which is a fancy term for the guy who has to apologize to angry tenants when the heating breaks. He spends his days being screamed at by people he used to look down on. They are learning, for the first time in their lives, what it feels like to be the person holding the wrench, rather than the person holding the whip. I do not hate them. I do not wish them harm. I simply do not think about them at all. They are characters in a book I have finished reading. I found my peace in a quiet corner of a cemetery in upstate New York. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I visited my mother. The grass was wet with dew, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. Her headstone was simple, gray granite, just as she had wanted. Evelyn Johnson, beloved mother. I knelt in the grass, not caring about the dampness seeping into the knees of my trousers. I ran my hand over her name. "I did it, Mom," I whispered to the stone. I finally stood up to him. Horpor. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was not the silver stars of a major general. It was something newer. It was the Distinguished Service Medal, awarded to me the week after the Titan Shield protocols were finalized. It was a medal given for exceptionally meritorious service to the government in a duty of great responsibility. I placed the medal on the top of the headstone. The ribbon fluttered slightly in the breeze. "He threw my trophy in the trash," I said softly. "But he cannot touch this. This is for you. You were the only one who saw the engineer before the soldier." I sat there for a long time, listening to the wind in the trees. I felt a lightness in my chest that I had not felt since I was 16 years old. The heavy cloak of seeking approval, the suffocating need to prove myself to a man who was incapable of understanding me, it was gone. I was just James, and that was enough. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the silence. I checked the screen. It was a number I did not recognize, originating from a medical facility in Connecticut. I answered. Johnson. James. The voice was weak, barely a whisper. It lacked the booming resonance that used to terrorize boardrooms. It sounded like dry leaves scraping across a pavement. Hello, Richard, I said. They tell me, he paused to cough, a wet, rattling sound. They tell me I do not have much time left. The stress my heart is not what it used to be. I am sorry to hear that, I said. And I meant it. Will you come? He asked. Please, just once. I am at the Cedar Creek Assisted Living Facility, room 302. I looked at my mother's grave. I thought about the bridge in Iraq. I thought about the check for $10,000. I will be there, I said. Cedar Creek was expensive. It smelled of lavender and money, designed to mask the scent of decay. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. I found room 302. Richard was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, looking out at a manicured garden. He looked impossibly small. The stroke he had suffered after the party had taken the use of his left side, and he slumped slightly in the chair. His hair was white and thin. The powerful titan of industry was gone, replaced by a frightened old man in a cardigan. He heard me enter and turned his head. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. General, he whispered. Just James, I said, pulling up a chair and sitting beside him. I lost it all, James, he said, staring at his hands. The company, the house, the name, it is all gone. Lucas and Julian do not visit. They blame me. They say I pushed too hard. They are who you made them. Richard, I said gently. And you, he looked at me with a desperate intensity. I tried to break you. I tried to make you into me. And because you resisted, because you fought me, you became the only one worth anything. He reached out his good hand. It was shaking. I was so blind, he wept. I measured the world in dollars. I thought that was the only scoreboard that mattered. But when I fell, when I hit the floor at that party, nobody helped me. Only you. The sun I threw away. He gripped my hand. His skin was like paper. I am sorry, James, he sobbed, his body shaking with the force of his regret. I am so sorry. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at him. I looked at the man who had cast a shadow over my entire life. I looked for the anger, the rage, the desire for vengeance. I searched my heart for the fire that had fueled me through West Point and the desert. It was gone. The fire was out. There was only ash. And underneath the ash, peace. I do not need to forgive you, Richard, I said softly, because I do not carry it anymore. I put it down. I am not doing this for you. I am doing it for me. I squeezed his hand. You need to rest now, I said. Stop fighting. The war is over. You lost. But it is okay to lose. Sometimes. Losing is the only way to find out who you really are. Are you happy, James? He asked, his voice fading. I am stable, I said, using the word that engineers love best. I have a strong foundation. I have Sarah, I have my children, I have my honor, I am steady. Richard nodded, closing his eyes. Steady, he whispered. That is good. That is good. I sat with him until he fell asleep. I did not say I loved him. That would have been a lie. But I did not hate him. I felt a profound, quiet pity for a man who had built a castle of gold, but died in a room of rented furniture, holding the hand of the son he never knew. I stood up. I walked out of the room. I walked down the hall, and out the front doors of the facility. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the parking lot. The air was cool and clean. Leaning against our Volvo was Sarah. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, looking radiant and real. Next to her were our 2 children, my 8-year-old daughter, Lily, and my 5-year-old son, Sam. "Daddy!" Lily screamed when she saw me. She ran across the parking lot. I dropped to one knee and caught her, swinging her up into my arms. She smelled of strawberry shampoo and sunshine. Sam collided with my leg a second later, hugging me tight. "Did you see him?" Sarah asked, walking over and placing a hand on my shoulder. "I saw him," I said. "How was it?" "It is finished," I replied. "The bridge is built. We can move on." Sarah smiled and kissed my cheek. "Good, because you have a message." "I do?" I asked, shifting Lily to my hip. "Check your phone," she said. I pulled my phone out. There was a text message from the Chief of Staff at the White House. "General Johnson, the President would like to formally nominate you for the position of National Security Advisor. He wants someone who knows how to build, not just destroy. Let us know your answer by morning." I looked at the text. National Security Advisor. It was the pinnacle of a career dedicated to strategy and defense. It was a job that would allow me to shape the safety of the world for the next generation. I looked at Lily. I looked at Sam. I looked at Sarah. "What does it say?" Lily asked, tracing the scar on my chin with her small finger. "It says that Daddy has a new job offer," I said. "But it also says that I am going to be home for dinner tonight." "Pizza?" Sam asked hopefully. "Pizza," I agreed. I put the phone away. I hoisted Lily up onto my shoulders, her legs dangling over the stars on my chest, invisible under my coat, but burnished into my soul. We walked toward the car, a family unit, solid and unbreakable. I was no longer the outcast. I was no longer the mechanic hiding in the garage. I was General James Johnson. I had built my own empire, not with loans and lies, but with blood, sweat, and the unshakable belief that a man is defined by his actions, not his lineage. I walked into the sunset, leaving the shadow of the Johnson legacy behind me forever. As the image of me walking with my family fades to black, I want to leave you with this thought. They laughed at me because I was different. I laughed at them because they were all the same. And when the uniform is put on, it is not to hide the man underneath, but to prove a simple truth. The value of a man is not found in his father's wallet, but in what he is willing to sacrifice to protect the things that truly matter. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below with your country or city, so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and redemption, please subscribe to the Calm Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who need a reminder that the truth always wins. Stay safe and stay strong.